Sage Wonder here, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk. So, this one's kind of fun for me. I'm sure it will spark lots of comments in the comment section. But this morning, very early, it's a super early 6 a.m. edition of Coffee Talk. Specific time. Today we're talking about the Dulce Wars, or the Dulce Wars. I don't know how you pronounce it. Dulce. So, this is an aliens conspiracy theory. I think it's one of the more unbelievable ones. But I will say that the primary character in this gave a lot of talks in the 90s. The whistleblower on the Dulce Wars. A guy named Phil Schneider. Phil Schneider was fairly believable. The problem with Phil Schneider's story is there's really no corroborating evidence. There aren't any other individuals. There's a few, but nothing that can really support what the stories he tells. But ooh-wee, wow, what a whopper of a story. So I thought I would share with you my opinion of the Dulce War conspiracy. So this is based around the area around Dulce, New Mexico. It's spelled Dulce, New Mexico. And I guess the story starts really in the mid-70s, where the locals, mostly Native Americans, around Dulce, New Mexico, start reporting cattle mutilations. Now, this is pretty well documented. Lots of photos. There's various county sheriffs in that area and around the country during that time who talk about cattle mutilations. I was writing a book. I may or may not finish it, but I included a pretty interesting interaction with an alien who was involved in mutilating a cow when a local cattleman walked up on him, and they had a shootout. But this is fiction, of course, something I was writing. You also start to get inside information and stories from the local Native Americans around Dulce, New Mexico, of encountering Crimea human-animal hybrids, specifically the pan, which would be the upper body of a human being and the lower body of a goat. And they claim to have had some close encounters with this alien, along with loads and loads of UFO interactions and sightings. And that part of it is pretty credible in the fact that there's a lot of Native Americans who were alive during the 70s who tell their stories, and they're quite believable. But the real interesting story comes from this guy, Phil Schneider. Phil Schneider claimed to be a engineer and a geologist, and that he claimed to be a government contractor. And so here's kind of his story in a nutshell. But if you really want to get the story, and you got an hour to blow, because his story takes an hour to tell when he tells it. Of course, Schneider has been dead since, I believe, 1996. When he passed away in 96, they claimed it was a suicide. But for the many years leading up to that, he always told everyone repeatedly, if I ever die and they say it's a suicide, they killed me. I'm not going to commit suicide. If I have a suicide and I've come up dead in that way, I've been executed. Don't let them fool you. So that's kind of bone-chilling, that he did die of a supposed suicide. So, Phil Schneider's story kind of goes like this. He said that he was working for the federal government, the military, and he was drilling and building an underground installation in Dulce, New Mexico for the military that is 2 miles deep. And that he was deepening this when he drilled through into another passageway. When he lowered himself down into this other passageway, he encountered 7-foot aliens. And to say that freaked him out was an understatement. He said as a government contractor, he was issued a sidearm. He drew a sidearm, he fired on these 7-foot-tall gray aliens, and they returned fire with what could be best described of in a science fiction movie as a disruptor. So not like a phaser on stun, and not like a phaser that just disintegrates you, but a disruptor like what I think the Romulans use disruptors in Star Trek, but they rip big holes in your body and stuff like that. And I gotta say that Phil Schneider had a screwed up left hand, where pretty much all that was left was this index finger on the end of a really boogered up hand. And he claims that that's what happened when he was shot with this disruptor. That it blew off most of his hand except his index finger on his left hand. And I gotta say, that's the best evidence to me. I mean, who knows how he got that if he's lying. But that is the best evidence, if you ask me, of the whole thing, was that boogered up hand. You should go check that out just to see that finger. But so he says then that Green Beret lowered in through the hole and rescued him, and there was a big shootout. And that in the course of a several-day war between these underground aliens and these underground military, that I think he said some 86 United States military officers were killed in this battle. Now, he also goes on to talk in detail how that this is a joint, either it became a joint operation or it started out being a joint operation between aliens and humans, and that the aliens, we were unaware what they were doing in the lower levels. That these lower level areas were an area where aliens were doing some stuff that was not right. So a part of this Dulce conspiracy, and I don't know how much of this comes directly from Phil Schneider and how much of this is elaborated on by other people or from sources maybe outside his talks. And maybe some guys on here, some of you guys know more about this, and you can leave some more information in the comments section. It's always, the comments section are so much fun. There's so much going on in there. I encourage everyone to check that out. But apparently, deep down in this underground base, these aliens had some really bad stuff going on. And that they had thousands and thousands of human captives. One angle on this conspiracy theory is that the United States government had a truce in the 1970s with these gray aliens, and they were kind of working together, sharing technology. And in return, we would let them kidnap human beings to use for their experiments, which included human, animal, and human alien hybrids. But also, one of the most disturbing reports and stories about the Dulce facility is that that these aliens feed on human beings by bathing in their blood, and that there's all of these big blood bath places where the aliens go and lay in big vats of blood, and that's quite gory. It's a gory story. But at any rate, this is one of the more interesting things, is that this concept that we have struck a deal with the aliens. And I will say that it was about the mid to late 1970s when we started seeing these massive child disappearances. There's a video out there, if you're ever in Oregon or you're just curious about it, there's a video out there that's done by our local affiliate news here in the Portland area. And I think it's called a ridiculous number of children are missing in Oregon, or something like that. Just Google Oregon missing children, and you'll hear all of these stories about how starting in the 70s and really getting more and more until nowadays people are scared to go out in the woods, because there's these stories of you just being camping in the woods, even in some like organized campgrounds with people around, and your kid will be there one minute and he's just gone the next. And one particular story was a grown man that this happened to, and they were able to track him, and apparently he had clothes missing, and well, I hope I don't sneeze right in the camera. He had taken his clothes off, and they found his clothes just like he'd taken them off a piece at a time, and they tracked him until his footprints and all traces just disappeared. So there's also stories that inside this Dulce compound, that this is where they do all kinds of mind control and genetic experiments down there. But yeah, I suggest if you're interested in this, you check out the Phil Schneider story, Also, there's another guy. His name is called Thomas Costello or Costello. He was supposed to have been a security guard down there, and a lot of this additional information about what was going on down in there supposedly come from this guy. The problem with that is that, as far as I know, he was never filmed, and they wonder if he even exists. But apparently, the government gave him cancer, and he went off to Europe somewhere to fight his cancer, and that's the last anybody has heard of Thomas Costello. But he's also a source of the information. A lot of people have done physical investigation around Dulce, and they can't find any kind of opening. But Schneider says that they were hidden in natural caves, and that the airstrips for them were some that kind of supplied those, and the entrances were located further north, and that they had this network of tunnels to get back to Dulce. Which kind of leads me to another conspiracy theory I've been talking about lately, which is our underground wars. And I got to tell you, last night I had another one of my hazy prophetic dreams of the future. I even had an operation name for this operation that was going on in these underground bases, where this underground war between the good guys and the bad guys is supposed to be going on right now, or I believe might be going on right now. That we may very well be involved in a civil war between the good guys and the bad guys, but it's all happening underground. And that's what all these explosions have been that people have been hearing. And I got to say, my own daughter is wigged out because for several days around Thanksgiving, like 7 or 8 days around Thanksgiving, she was hearing continuous explosions out in the country where she works at a dog kennel. And that she could also hear muffled gunfire as well as explosions. And I find that very credible. Who knows what she was hearing, but it goes in line with what I think I've been hearing from around the country about these underground explosions, the booms that they're calling sonic booms. And then another element of this are these fireballs, these flashes that are sometimes red, or sometimes they're purple, sometimes they have a green hue, and they're accompanying these sounds. And I've said in the comment section, in the discussion we had about the booms, that I felt like that these flashes people are seeing are from underground explosions that are venting out through vent holes. And that's why if you go to where the explosion was, you can't find any evidence of it, because they're just venting out from these vent holes, and when the explosion dies back, the fire goes back inside, and you can't tell where it's coming from. And then I saw an interesting story from a researcher online who says that these colorful explosions are very much in line with nuclear explosions. That nuclear explosions give you a colorful show, that the flash associated with them are very colorful. And also EMPs, that an EMP flash is what you're seeing with those multiple colors. Are the good guys and the bad guys in the military and the deep state battling for controls of these underground bases, maybe even with alien help, like in Dulce? Are the things that we're seeing, the flashes, actually EMPs? Are they EMPing each other, trying to knock each other's equipment out? And these flashes you're seeing are not causing EMP disruption on the surface, because for there to be EMP disruption, you have to have line of sight. That's how EMP works. That's why if they were going to EMP the United States, they'd have to set off a device way up in the stratosphere so that it got past all the mountains and all the physical characteristics of the surface to get every single area. That if you had it lower to the ground, you could be EMP'd on one side of a mountain and not on the other. So an underground EMP might be able to be seen from the surface, but not necessarily knock out any electronics, because it's coming from underground and there's no line of sight. But somehow the fire and light display is escaping through these vents. Very interesting. Are we having another round of Dulce wars, only this time it's us against us? Are there underground wars that we aren't aware of? Interesting. Maybe this is what Q is referring to. But nonetheless, Dulce Wars, check it out. Phil Schneider, you can see his wigged out nasty finger hand thing. And did Phil Schneider kill himself, or was he offed by the government for running his mouth? You decide. Coffee talk. All right, y'all have a great day. I may do another one of these because I've been thinking a lot about the Mandela effect. Maybe we'll talk about that next.